Thanks. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sally Perella. I'm the Programme Manager at Guildford Art Society, and we're really pleased to welcome everyone from Woking and Fleet Art Societies as well today to our first virtual demo of the year, which is coming live from Jamaica, which I'm very excited about. So let me introduce you to Susan Clare, who's going to be doing the demo today. She has lived in Jamaica for over 25 years and currently spends some of her time in the UK and Jamaica. I know where I'd be at this time of year. And she's going to be doing an underwater scene demo for us today. Housekeeping wise, we've got you on mute. If you want to ask a question, at the bottom of your screen is a chat function. You can click on that and then type in your questions, and I will then obviously relay those to Susan and we will go through those, or we'll unmute you as we go, depending on what we get. We'll break in about an hour's time for a cup of tea, etc., and we hope to finish by 4:30. So I am going to hand over to Susan and put myself on mute.
Well, hello, and welcome to my studio in Jamaica. It's a real pleasure to be sharing this time with you, people in Guildford, Woking and Fleet. That's such a lovely big group. So you're probably wondering why I'm in Jamaica, and the short answer to that question is that I came here fairly soon after graduating to have the opportunity to get involved with running a scuba diving business. And I did that for about 20 years, which is why I'm quite familiar with the reefs. And it's always been a lifelong passion to help to raise awareness and also, you know, make people more aware of how their lives impact the reefs. So I've been lucky enough to be able to spend more recently some time in both countries and sort of get to know some of the art scene in England as well. And that's been a real pleasure reconnecting with home. So first of all, I thought just to give you a little glimpse of where I am and why I love being here. I'll give you a little glimpse outside. Take you onto my veranda and you can see what I'm looking at when I look outside my studio. So as you can see, there's almost no other houses in view. That's a piece of, I'm upstairs, which explains why I'm looking down on my own roof. And so it's very quiet up here, and I just love the atmosphere. And it gives me a lot of garden to be inspired by, as well as my underwater stuff. So works well for me. Okay, so I thought I'd start off by just showing you the reference picture I'm going to work from and some of the preparations that I make before I start a painting. They say that 80% of a painting goes into the prep work, right? And 20% into the actual painting. So I'm going to just put this on while I'm talking to you here. Okay, and let me share my screen with you. So the reference picture, the main reference picture that I'm going to be using is this one, and it's been taken by a friend of mine called Belinda Morrow. She's involved with an organization called the White River Fish Sanctuary, and they are about 70 miles up the coast from me, but it's an area that I used to dive in my diving days. I'm quite familiar with where they are, and it's absolutely beautiful. This is just taken from snorkeling, not even diving. There are lots of lovely little places off the Jamaica Inn, which is where she's based. And they do a lot to involve the fishermen and educate the fishermen about how to not to deplete the fisheries while they're still making a living, help them with equipment and stuff like that and education. And at the same time, they do a lot of cleanups and all those kind of initiatives to help to safeguard the reefs and patrolling protected areas, that kind of thing. So I'll talk to you some more about what's actually in this picture later, but from an artist's point of view, you can see we've got some a lovely color scheme here, which I think works really harmoniously. Although maybe there's a little bit of a sort of dull area in the center here. Well, that third sweet spot down lower here, if you know about the rule of thirds, where you've got a sweet spot on the, if you divide it into three both ways, you have quite a focal point right there. And it seems to me it's a little bit grey, although there are these lovely sea fans. So I thought, what else could we put in that picture? And came up with the idea of, now where's my share gone? This other picture, which I'm going to steal a little piece from. This is also taken in Jamaica, but I love this boulder coral here. It's got lovely little indentations that we can use some of the sort of, calling it mixed media, it's probably mixed technique type acrylics, and this feather star. This is an invertebrate. These are all animals, by the way. I'll get into that a bit later on. These are communal animals, we normally call corals. And this is a feather star, which can actually free swim as well with its little legs and its arms all moving up and down to propel it. But it looks like a feather duster. That's where it's got its name. So I thought we might pop those into the arrangement and make a better composition. So then from that, I usually do a little thumbnail sketch. And my thumbnail sketch is, where is it? It's next to this one. So let's go back to that one for a minute. And sorry, there it is. So as you can see, I've done it in pen so that you can see it better, but I usually do a pencil sketch. It's only about 3 or 4 inches big. I've worked out the general positioning of things. I know that I want a nice dark streak running sort of diagonally through there, which is echoed a bit lower down. So you've got this streak here, which is made up of both distant reef and dark fish. And then you've got this echo of that sort of shape going through here. And in the center here, on the third sweet spot, we've got our lovely sort of more pinkish coral head and the feather star right there. So I think that'll give us a really nice composition. I also tend to make notes for myself just to scribble and remind myself which things, you know, if there's something relevant. So I work from that and the reference pictures. And if I go to my other screen, you'll be able to see when I'm painting. I can find my other screen. Where's it gone? Okay, there. So without further ado, do feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. I'm quite happy to stop and answer questions if Sally can read them out for me, or even not stop and answer the questions. I prefer you to have the question answered when it's relevant, rather than sort of saving them up for the break when I can't really remember which bits, what I did when. So
yeah, I've got chat open, so either do that or in the reactions on the bottom bar, if you want to raise your hand, I'll then unmute you so you can ask your question.
Yep, that's great too. Okay, so we're going to make this one the spotlight. Whoops, no, that's not quite right. Take that one off. There we go. So you should be able to see the reference picture here, which I'll share with you, so if those of you that want to have a go at it later. And here's the little bit taken from another reference picture from Montego Bay. This one is up near Ocherius, but it's all the same coastline, same sort of depth. So there's nothing unrealistic about putting those two together. So just to run you through what I'm using today, I love to use these large brushes, Liquitex freestyle brushes. So these are the paddle style brush with a short handle or no handle, and then you've got the long version of the same thing, slightly longer bristles. So I'll be using 3-inch, 2-inch, sometimes a sort of a hairy version. And then I like my rosemary brushes, and this is the Dale Rowney one for the flats, short flats, with some of them come to more of a knife edge when you wet them than others. So those are my detail brushes. For accurate elements, I do love to use palette knife and some scratchy things. So I make scratchy tools out of all sorts of bits and pieces. Things like, I think this is a hair product applicator, old makeup applicators that have worn out. I hate you know, the idea of plastic going into the environment. So if I can repurpose something, credit cards, I always keep a stash of those. And even little bits of card, especially the ones that are slightly shiny on one side. You know,
Susan, because of where you're standing, some people are finding it quite difficult to hear you.
Oh, okay. Let me move this.
I think because we're looking at the other side. You've moved away from wherever you were speaking into.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. I wonder if I put the volume down for me, if that will improve it. Just seeing what it is. That better?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Better now? Okay, I'll
Yeah.
just make it a little bit closer. Yeah, I think I had my volume up high, which it seems to adjust. It's a wobbly bit now. Okay. Okay, I think that should.
Yeah,
do it. Okay, thanks for mentioning that. So yes, we were talking about shiny bits of cardboard. So if they're shiny on one side and the dull, flat sort of absorbent on the other side, then I can use them for various things that I'll show you how to get a coral looking technique. Other things I use, a spray bottle, repurposed hair product bottles with water inside, my water pots, paper towel, and of course some paint. So my paint, I'm using mostly heavy body acrylics. So I love a round palette like this. I don't know if you've ever seen Hashim Akir do his demos, but I have a studio in England in the same building as Hash. So I've done quite a lot of his workshops, and that was what sort of turned me onto doing acrylics rather than watercolor, which was always my my preferred method in the olden days, if you like. So heavy body acrylics, you can even turn the palette up and they're not going to run down. When I've done this priming of this board, which we'll come to in a minute, I've used slightly thinner acrylic paint just because it's easier to get it to spread over the entire surface quickly. So I primed this with a mixture of a turquoise, which is a thinner paint, with a little white and a little of the cobalt blue, just to give us a medium tone background that you can either go work lighter or darker. And so the surface I'm working on, sometimes it's hard to get canvases here. So this is actually a piece of plyboard that I've prepped and primed and then painted the color on top. It's slightly different. You still have a slightly textured surface from the surface with the wood. It's not as nice. Well, if you like the texture of canvas, it's not quite the same, but it's different and it's interesting. It's quite absorbent as well. You tend to find that the paint gets sucked up a little more than it might usually. So going back to what we're doing today, basically what I'm going to do is describe going on a dive with you with artist eyes, because all of you probably have a different way of looking at things than just the general public. So you'll be thinking about things like the lighting. So that's one of the first things that you notice that's different when you go under the water. Colors get absorbed differently, and pretty much the source of our light, which is always a consideration for artists, is pretty much directly overhead. And what that does for our distance, when we're doing a landscape, you know that you've got the bluest sky at the top and it comes down hazy towards the horizon, where you're looking through more distance of air particles, basically. Well, this is the other way around. You tend to have the lightest part of the blue at the top. Then where you're looking through more blue water in the mid-water, you've got the darkest blues. And then when you've got down near to the bottom, you'll have sand and other lighter surfaced substrates that are reflecting the light back up again. So in order to get some interesting marks in here, we're going to start off with my 3-inch brush, just dabbing it into the water to dampen it. I'm not diluting the paint. And then picking up colours. I want my underneath marks to be sort of gestural and slightly abstract. So we're going to be picking up several colours at once. avoiding white. I'm not going to put white into it until much later. Most of the colours here are in the Liquitex range and one or two golden. So I have a colour like this. This is a light blue, which is a bit of an unusual colour, but it's in the Liquitex range. I've got cobalt blue, phthalo blue, and French ultramarine. This is a light magenta, which is also a bit different from the same Liquitex range, and this light green is a little bit different too. This one is green gold, that's from Winsor & Newton. Cadmium yellow, yellow ochre, raw sienna, burnt sienna, cadmium red, alizarin crimson. And those are sort of probably pretty much my standard colours anyway, but sometimes I vary what I'm putting in according to the subject matter. So I'm picking up some blues. I'm picking up some of the light blue, a little of the turquoise. I want these colours to be sort of mingling, and use a piece of old cardboard that's been obviously used before, just to turn over the colours together. So we get.
I've still got some feedback from people saying they really can't hear. It says a couple of people have said when you're facing the camera, they can hear a lot better, but there's still quite a lot of people not being able to clearly hear what you're saying when you're talking facing the canvas.
Right. Okay. We can just move this then. That can work. Probably not such a pretty view from this when I put it on the desk, but I think it might be. I'll be talking towards it instead of away. So let's see if that will work. I can move it when I come back to talk to you again. Is that a better sound now?
Yes.
Okay. So apologies for the less than pretty view on the other camera. So yeah, I'm just turning over these colours slightly so we get a streaky effect. And as I said, we want some of the lighter colours to be up near the top. And the entire look of what I'm producing, I want it to be slightly impressionistic. So just turning over a bit more of the light blue into it. We want the lighter colours at the top. You have to be generous with the paint. You can feel already that it's being sucked up quite effectively by the surface of the board. And I've already put 2 or 3 layers of white underneath the blue. So we'll just continue being generous with this. Bit more paint there. I know that I want a darker blue streak to run about 2/3 of the way up the painting. And I'm not worrying about if it's suggesting anything other than just mark making at the moment. Looking up towards the surface of the water when you're underneath, sometimes you can see reflections of the surface, which you know, you get those like ripple look effects, but we don't want to be looking up that much at this. We're not seeing the surface particularly, we're looking through the water. So one of the other things that happens to colour when you go underwater is the colours start to be absorbed by the water. It's just a physical thing that happens. So the colours start to disappear, and as you go deeper, more of them disappear, and they go in the order of yellows disappear first, then reds, then greens, and then finally blues disappear. So, well, no, the blues stay. It's the last one. So they don't really disappear until you get really down into the abyssal zone, and then there's like no light at all. But so if you go diving at about 30 feet, you're going to see all the colours. Below that, things start to get much more, so that if you've seen people's actual dive photos and they look very just blue, that's the reason. It's not that they're a bad photographer or anything. So there are ways that photographers combat that and add white light flash to their cameras, obviously. And it's one of the reasons that night diving is so exciting, because you're shining white light straight onto the subject, and that brings out a whole load of colours that you weren't expecting. So in this darker, I'm just going to add a little touch of alizarin crimson into my blue mixture there, sticking with the more the French ultramarine blue. And we're still getting streaks in there because I'm not mixing it thoroughly. And I just want to mark that position through there so that we get some sense of where that dark patch is going to be, giving us a nice background for some of the other things that are going to be going on. And then as we're moving down here, there's quite a dark, so it's funny, these fish, these ones are called surgeon fish or doctor fish. And the reason they're called that is because they have a little knife or scalpel-like protrusion on the side of their tail fin. And actually what that does is, if somebody's giving them some trouble, they'll just stick it out sideways, you know, like those big trucks that have pointy bits on them. And that wards off anybody from getting too close to them. They're very important for our reef because these are the herbivores. And I did mention earlier that corals are animals. So coral animals live together in colonies. The reason they're different from other animals that we normally think about is that they can't move around because they're attached to their calcium carbonate substrate, the structure of the coral that builds reefs. You know, they have to wait for food to come to them, which is carried to them on clean water and currents. And they also need sunlight because they have a symbiotic relationship with some little algae that live inside them, and they need the sunlight. So that's why you'll find the brighter corals in the shallower areas, and they only grow in the areas where there is actually light. But one of the things that's happening today with our world today is that with all the construction for hotels and everything else, a lot of silt goes down into the water, and that silt lands on the coral reef and deprives the corals of the sunlight they need and the clean water, because if they get doused with a whole load of, it's like having a load of builder's dust all over your dining table, except they actually don't get any clean little microplankton to eat because they're not carried to them on the current anymore, they're stifled. So that's one of the reasons why it's so important for, and corals are so slow growing compared to algae. You get this competition thing happening. Now down here we've got these fire corals, which are sort of a mustard color. Again, they're hard corals, so they've got a hard substrate base, which is, they sort of secrete that as they grow. And so what's happening here is we've got a lovely brightish yellow color to bring forward the foreground of our picture, which works for an artist, obviously. So I'm just going to switch, put my brush into the water and switch over for a minute to another brush. I forgot to mention earlier, I do use these repurpose trays that are unfortunately still much too available in Jamaica. So I give them, I try to avoid them when I can, but when you end up with some of them, I always make sure they get reused. So I'm going to switch over to a yellow, and what we'll do is start with the 2-inch brush here, dipping into the water just to flex the brush and get it so that not too much paint goes right up into it. And we're going to move into a sort of, we're not expecting to have bright yellow initially because we're working on top of this quite strong turquoise. So we're going to build some layers towards the yellow that we want. So sort of thinking about this colour beforehand, I'm going to use a bit of the green gold and a bit of the light green, and dipping also into yellow ochre. And we'll turn those over. What we get there. So we've got some on the side here, and we'll detail these more as necessary as we go along through the rest of the painting when we put the structure in. We've got some vertical looking ones here, and I do quite like how that streaky look sort of emulates the different structures of the curves in the fire coral. I'm just going to lift that up. It's not down too far. Okay, we need some more. So what I like to do is to create one paint color from the last one. So I'll always work back into the same color if they're a related color, or the same patch of color, I should say, patch of paint. And here we've got these. You notice that I don't draw anything out particularly. That's because from having done that little thumbnail sketch, I've paid attention to proportions, positions. So having done that, it's sort of lodged in my brain as to where things need to go and be. And it becomes much easier to work without having to do a drawing. So just moving towards some more yellow ochre in the front here. We've still got a long way to go with all of these features, but I do love the fact that when you're working with these big brushes, you can cover quite a lot of distance quite quickly. So we were talking about corals and their competitive battle with the algae, what you say it. So what happens naturally on a coral reef? There's a balance between the two. Algae grow very fast. They compete for land space, if you like, with the corals. The corals are very slow growing, but they have a more permanent basis, and they're stronger, but they're also more vulnerable because especially at the moment, because algae are favored by all the things that we humans are doing to the water, like when all the phosphates run off from agricultural fertilizers. The nitrogen and phosphate in the water favors the growth of those little algae over the growth of the coral. Coral need clean water. So what happens then is that anytime a bit of algae, a coral gets a piece of damage on it, the algae swoop in there and take over that space. And then that's their real estate instead. And so you get these patches of coral, and you can see some of it sort of here, where this is just dead space with the white is the calcium carbonate exposed sort of bones of the coral without the living coral. And then this green algae is taking over and working into that space as soon as it gets a chance. All right, going back in for some more yellow here, nice and thick. We've got a nice stand of this coral in the middle here. Any questions yet?
Nothing so far. Now we fixed the sound. Everybody
right
seems
now.
quite happy currently. But as a reminder, everyone, stick them in the chat and or raise your hand and we'll unmute, or I'll read out the question.
Okay, so you'll notice that I've brought this up slightly. It's sort of closer to a third of my painting, whereas that's a little lower. I just love the way these colours look in the foreground, so sort of making a bit more of them than there was. So we've got some variety in the colours, although no form at present. And you'll remember also that I'm going to add in this creature, this lovely coral, into this part. So we can work it around the structures that we want in the foreground as well. Some of these are nice sea fans, and they usually, when they're healthy, they look sort of lavendery colour. But these look a bit sort of old and battered, and I thought they didn't bring much to the centre of our focal points. So that's why I thought I'll just add this guy in instead, with the lovely feather star sitting there as well. And that will give us something more to look at in this part. This guy's quite important though, and it's a shame it doesn't show up a bit more. But that's one of the beauty, if we go back to talking about the fish for a bit, these particular fishes, these surgeon fishes, the dark ones, they almost look like gaps in the reef because they're just this sort of dark colour of night, or the colour of shadowy water. But they're incredibly important for the reef, because what they'll do is they'll swoop down, 100 at a time, and land on a little 2 meters patch of reef, and they nibble off all of these green algae. So they're like coral gardeners, and they help the corals. That's why we don't want to be eating them. There are some other guys in here. These are called Bermuda chub. As you can see, they have quite a different face. This one's got a real big round eye and a little short mouth. These guys have this, well, their mouth is down there, but they have a smiley look because they have a big, what's that called again there? Their gill plate is, gives them the look of having a smile, and the eye is very high up from the mouth. So I think these guys, who are much more carnivorous, are maybe sneaking along, hiding with this group so that they can sneak up on something they want to eat, like the smaller fishes. But together they're making quite a nice harmonious look, so good to have them there. All right, so we'll put in a little bit of this feathery stuff here, and I'll show you in a little while a different way to get that textured look in there. At the moment, the underlying paint is too wet still. And I did also want to put in some of this. This is an algae, but it's kind of interesting. It has these triangular shapes, sort of leaf things that stick out, protrusions. And then we want a slightly pinker or more, I think this is a very pink photo. Everything looks a bit pink. I know this feather star and it's red and white. And this is usually more of a same sort of mustard color, but we'll make it a little bit more. I'm going to put some raw sienna into the same mixture and some burnt sienna. It's more of the burnt sienna sort of color. So let's see if we can just create that mound in there. I want to make it darker than it actually is to start with. We'll come back onto that in just a little while. So I'm using, basic sort of blocky brush strokes to indicate where this little mound is going to be. Bit of creative license going in here. If it doesn't come exactly the way we wanted it to, that'll be fine. And I know that I'm going to put the feather star on last, so I can just create the mound without worrying about the feather star. Bring it down between some of these little structures there. Down into this. We'll have some nice shadows in that gap there anyway. So instead of having this piece of rather bare coral, we'll have the nice mound of live coral instead. So you might be thinking, well, surely there can't always be, living reef can't be all over the place. Well, to give you an idea, when I started diving here in the which would have been 1981, we had approximately 70% live coral. By the time I finished my sort of diving career, which was 97, it had gone down to 45%. Nowadays, if you are lucky enough to go and see some, go and snorkel on a coral reef, what you're actually looking at is probably about 10 to 15% live coral. And that's the good areas. So you know that if the average is now 10%, you know there are some areas that are just completely devastated, which is why it's all so very tragic, because these things sequester a lot of carbon for us. And that's a sort, you know, something that could be helping us with the whole climate change issue. And it's so they're definitely needed to be protected for many reasons other than just looking nice and entertaining tourists. So there's our live coral. It's not quite the same shape. I'm quite happy with how it looks. It looks realistic enough. And now we're going to put in some position of some of these fish and maybe make a little, I want to in particular place the ones that have some yellow color in them so that they'll be guiding us to where we're going with this. I know that the feather star is going to be sitting in here and kind of coming out around some of these structures of fire coral. We've got some other fish that are, the great thing about schools of fish, especially herbivores, they want to hide and not be noticed. And so when you come to painting them, it's a little bit like, well, wait a minute, I can't really see where one starts and one ends. But that is one of the things about it that's beautiful, because it's kind of like, you know, creating a little semi-abstract when it really, and it's also realism. I'm always trying to move a little bit towards, more towards semi-abstract looking things. Okay, I'm going back into my, more into the yellow ochre. And we'll create a little bit of these tops of the sea fans as if they're behind this coral head here. So there isn't anything here, but when we sit it in here, we've got to integrate it with the rest of the painting. So I'll just pretend that that's where that is. The other thing we can do is there'll be light falling on the top of this. So there will be slightly more light, but I did want to, if you remember, I said I wanted this to be darker than the actual thing, and we'll come to that in a little while. We're going to do another layer on it later on and do some scratch through stuff. So putting that brush into the water, giving a bit of a clean out. I'm going to change color to a sort of a greenish. These fishes here, some of them are catching a really greenish light on them, along with the darks, which is helping us to see them. Okay, so just pressing my brush out on paper towel, and let's put some fish in. So I'm going into my green gold. Green gold happens to be rather a transparent color, so that's why I usually put something else that's more opaque with it. I don't want to go to white yet, that makes everything look chalky. So I either want my yellow ochre or some of this light green to go with the green gold and give it a bit more opacity so that it stands out on the against the blue. So we'll mix this up just at the edge of my blue area. Again, I quite like it streaky. So positioning that fish now, it's about halfway up, isn't it? We might move it up just a little. I want it about there. So trying to keep the brush strokes simple, as that's enough green on there. We'll be creating the rest of it with the darks. Then we have another one here, which is sort of central, slightly lower than that one. So we'll just pop them in there. And remember, you can always cut into these, if these blocks of color aren't quite right, so you can fine tune the details later on. There's a bit of color on the tail there that's that. Let's bring it down a little more to get some streakiness down the back. There's another one leading from that. I love how they're all overlapping. And as I said before, that thing about not being able to see where one starts and the other one ends, apart from being a nice device for us artists, it is crucial to the fish for their survival, because that's how, when predators come along, they're a bit confused because they're not sure where one fish starts and one fish ends. And that means that they've got safety in numbers, just like herds. It's a bright tail there, you can fine tune later. Now this dark one down here, we're almost not seeing any details, but there is a greenish part to it. So we'll put the green on and then cover it over later. Its tail is probably going to be getting confused with that feather style, but that's okay. And there's a pectoral fin sitting out at the side there, which is more visible than the rest of the fish, really. So these are just guideline marks where I'm plotting in where some of my fish are going. It's not meant to be a finished rendition of the fish, obviously. I did want to try and get this coral in, which is basically the same sort of colour. So we might have some of that just popping up behind, in between these sea fans, just as it is. I'm going to put it here, I think. Yeah, we'll just add that just as a little sticking up tower, and we'll put some details into it later. Okay, while we've got green, we're just going to go back into the green gold. I want to, realistically, there are going to be patches of algae as well as all the nice things we want to see. So we'll just have some extra green in some of these little spots. I'm adding a bit more blue to it to make it darker. That's cobalt blue I just picked up. So it'll be sort of creating some shadow greens in between. Give us some form into some of these. Sections down here. So we're also connecting with the base of the painting. A little bit more. Some of that dark green up over the coral behind it. And there's some greens in this part here, some very bluish greens, giving us some shadows in there. Okay, and a little bit more blue to define that. This very dark blue here we'll probably put in, whoops, that's not really dark enough. We'll be putting in to give us some definition between this coral head and the fire coral, but it's not sure what color it's going to be yet, so because we're going to do another layer on that. So while these dry, let's put in some more fish, and we'll come back to fine tune this later on. I know this needs to come more like this, but let's sort that out later. And a bit down the bottom here. Shadows between those spans of fire coral. Oh, fire coral, by the way, stings. So if you see this stuff looking all pretty in a snorkeling area, don't go putting your feet down near it. Apart from the fact that's a bad idea because you always damage the reef if you put your feet down. You'll get stung. Well, that's not nice. It looks pretty, but you can't touch it. Okay, remembering that we're going to put that creature in there, but we want the reef to be basically built as if it were a normal reef and the animal wasn't there, and then we'll put the animal in front. Got lots of feathery appendages and stuff, so it's kind of almost see-through. Okay, rinsing out my brush again. And I could have actually left that brush as my yellowish brush and gone to the other one for my, go back to my dark blues and put in some more dark blue fishes. Again, pressing out. So that's another thing I sort of liken the process of painting or making a painting. It's a bit like going on a dive, because you have to have some courage when you dive into a painting. And in the same way, you sort of don't know quite what you're going to encounter. And some of the best things on a dive come out of, within the rules, you have to obey the rules of time and depth and stuff like that. But responding to what you find when you get there, like you may follow a turtle along for a while, or some of the best things are like the things that we're looking at in this picture, or all the little things that you don't necessarily, it's not anything spectacular, but for instance, in a view like this one with the feather star, you can see all sorts of little tiny fish interacting. There's going to be little tiny sort of shrimp-like things in the water that just hang around the feather star. They're getting a bit of protection from it. There's likely to be little snapping shrimps living underneath it that will come out and catch their prey with a little there's all sorts of fascinating little things if you just stop and observe a small area of the reef. And that's one of the things I always used to love to do, especially with beginners, because it stops you worrying about what's going on with your equipment and am I doing this right? And you get so entranced by just looking at everything that it becomes a magical journey. So we're going to put in some more darks. No, this is still too wet. Let's see now. Let's plot in. I don't really like to go to whites too early. We want to put in a bit more of the darks before we go have a break. So let's go to some alizarin crimson with cobalt. We're also picking up some French ultramarine.
Susan, we can do the break whenever is most convenient for drying. So
yeah.
Just when you want to
Okay.
do that.
Well, give me a couple of more minutes and then I'll let it dry, give you a quick studio tour and then we'll be just on time for break, I think.
Okay.
All right. Okay, so we've got a dark fish here. Let's just plot that in approximately there. And I do love that with these brushes, you can kind of skim and it gives you an almost there look compared to the solid where it's definitely there. We've got a tail just here. Let's mark that in. It's, you know, so I think somebody in one of my workshops caught me out for a saying that apparently I've been saying quite a lot, is that confidence is more important than accuracy, which in some cases is true. So actually that's a place, you'll notice it's too high up, but maybe
depends
it's more
on the job, doesn't it?
Are you know, it's one brush stroke rather than going back and fiddling with it to get the right shape. And that's what's appealing, is that it's the energy in it rather than, oh, that's not quite the right shape for that fish. So we've got a rhythm going on here as well. It's beautiful with these fishes, and of course that's also part of their whole way of avoiding predators and stuff, is to have a certain distance between them, and communication between them as well, so that they all turn together, and that stuff is just fascinating. And so just plotting out where those little dark marks are, then we know we've got those fish in that arrangement. These little dots, of course, are something to do with sort of problems with the camera lens, I think. I don't know if it's got dust on it, or there's some little water droplets inside the housing for the camera, but they actually look quite adorable. So we may find ourselves putting them in, or we might find that the haziness that I've already created in this area is enough to suggest that there's, you know, you get that sort of iridescent look when you look through water, like it's shimmering and moving. This paint is very thick, so I'm just touching the corner of my brush into the water just to give it a little bit more chance of moving about and turn it over. So this is this mark here. So we have a dark fish right above it. We know that we will need, that's the tail bit. So interacting with that tail is the other tail. And this paint's a little bit too thick. Slightly more water and picking up a bit more. Sometimes I want that sort of thready look where the texture shows through, and sometimes I don't want it. So at the moment I don't want it. And because a lot of fish are silvery as well to reflect the light, and that also keeps them hidden. So although these fish are dark, there is a silveriness to them as well. That's interesting. We've got one of those, could be dust in the water reflecting light back as well, maybe it's a flash, I'm not sure. So that's, you know, not something that's there really in front of the fish, it's just an anomaly in the photo. Again, we want these fish to not be entirely recognizable as, oh, there's that fish and there's that fish. So if they run together and look a bit confusing, that's fine. That's sort of what we want. This one's interesting because it's one of the light fish. And so is that one that they've turned, because it's turned the other way, away from the light, it's looking like a dark fish, but it's actually not dark in the way that these are dark. That means that one's tail there, so moved a bit. And streakiness actually does work at looking like the shimmery patterns in some of them. So part of this fish is the dark part too. We'll be coming back to these with some detailed work with a smaller brush too. But for now, I just want to get the basic colours in big blocky marks. Now we've got some silvery fish there. And we've got a dark shadow of something. Yes, I think that's a sea fan that's turned sideways between that one and the next. And we've got a dark fish in the middle there. This is still wet here, so I'm going to leave that till later. The front portion of this fish and some sticky paint, so I'm going to leave that till later. And we've got a couple of dark fish here. Let's just see if we can get one of them in at least on this portion here. And the fact that you can't quite tell whether some of these are fish or parts of this, there's a coral structure coming up here, which the fish will shelter under, so they're not visible from above. So sometimes you can't tell what's fish and that's called elkhorn coral, that kind of coral.
We have a question. Daisy has asked, could you please tell us again what make the wide brushes are, please?
Liquitex Freestyle. So they've got a freestyle range within Liquitex. Very much available in the UK.
I found them on the CASART website because I was looking at them. I've never seen brushes like that and was very excited by them. So, yeah, CASART definitely have the whole range.
Yes. I think the SAA even has them now as well. They didn't used to, but I think they have now. Might be wrong. Okay, so I know that doesn't look like very much yet, but what are we doing on time? I'm going to give you a quick studio tour while this is the paint setting up and settling down a bit more, then we can do some exciting stuff with it. So let me take you back onto my main picture, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the similar techniques that I've done in recent paintings. So bear with me. Move that spotlight.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. So first of all, we've got a painting that I'm really quite proud of. This is a large one. It's called To Bleach or Not to Bleach. I talked somewhat about corals. I haven't explained yet about bleaching. But that's something that happens when the water temperature is too high for too many weeks in the summer. You might be wondering what on earth it is that's actually sticking out of the painting here. It's a plant substance from my ferns. It's like fern skeleton. And it really looks like certain types of coral. So I've incorporated it into the surface of the painting. And then bleaching is where the corals lose all their symbiotic algae. They just kind of throw them off because it's too hot. And if the water doesn't come back to normal temperatures within 3 or so weeks, there's no way they can reclaim their algae. Sometimes recovery is possible, but a lot of the times the coral will just die after that event, which is why it's so critical that, sea temperature is absolutely key to keeping our corals alive. I've also used various different methods of stamping paint on there, scraping it, and there's also texture into the surface with gesso and stuff. Another one, this is not underwater, but it's a good example of what the work I do with palette knife and also texture. There's I like the things I add into the painting to have some relationship to what it is I'm painting. So these are burlap bags that the Jamaican coffee comes in. There's some mesh there as well. And this is actually, I put coffee grounds into the paint to make it look like sand there. They've already been dried, been drunk, then dried, and then incorporated. So this one is from a photo taken by the same lady, Belinda Morrow. And I'll tell you more afterwards about her work, what she does with White River Fish Sanctuary. So this is, again, the same kind of piece of the fern is representing sea fans in this painting. And these are the same kind of fire corals. This one is a different technique that I've developed. It's by a young coral researcher, this photo, of just a canoes ride and a snorkel from the coast where I'm actually running a retreat in September. And this is a scratch through technique that I think really represents the different types of coral, because they're nearly all the same color, but the textures on them are quite different. There's a little crab. This is another picture that I did last week for a demo. That's a place on the Black River that we like to go. You can go for a day out and take the boat, this kind of boat, up the river. They show you the crocodiles and then let you jump and swim in the river. But it's further up, apparently, where the crocodiles don't go. Here's a lion.
We have another question for you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What adhesive do you use to stick the reeds, etc., to your paintings with?
Very good question. I use gesso. So I'm like priming the surface with gesso to create quite a lot of texture anyway. And then I'll push the fern into it, and then you have to add more. And then you have to usually weight it down while it dries, which sometimes takes 3 days to dry properly. And then, of course, when I've actually finished the painting, I'll then give it about 3 coats of acrylic matte varnish so that it's well sealed in.
Lovely.
Take any chances of it falling off or something coming along and nibbling it. I also have a couple of watercolor paintings here that were mixed media that I did also for demos. This one is a lionfish, which has a really interesting story because it doesn't really belong in the Caribbean. So we're encouraging people to eat them. And this is a parrotfish, and there's quite an interesting relationship between them because the parrotfish build reef and help with inshore sand production, and yet the lionfish is the one that's doing all the damage and gobbling up all the baby fish. So I sort of developed this little saying for people to help people remember when they go on holiday: eat lions, but not parrots, which sounds really weird when you say it, but if you remember it's fish, then it makes sense. Okay, are we ready for a little break? And I will pause the recording for you and come back in 10 minutes.
Yeah, I think 10 minutes is perfect. Let's say just before 3:45, yes?
Okay. Perfect.
Lovely.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hello and welcome back again. So just remember to say that this lovely reference picture by Belinda is one of a series that I've worked from, and she also allowed me to paint a painting that has some lovely red fish painting through a crevice, and I painted that about 4 feet wide, and it's actually I'm donating it to raise money for the White River Fish Sanctuary. So that's part of the project they're going on at the moment. And if you happen to be a reader of Artists and Illustrators magazine, you'll see the picture was in the February issue. So it's not quite the current issue, but it was the last issue, even though it is February. It was the last issue. And yeah, you can read about how I created it. And this has similar layers of texture and interesting methods in it. So I'd encourage you to have a look at that.
We have another question.
Yes.
Please could you ask Susan what the name of the artist is who influenced her approach and with your style?
Yes, Hashim Akib. I mean, he's not the only one, but the blocky part of and using the big palette and dipping into different paints at the same time is I'll put it in the chat for you so that it's quite a strange name. Oops. Don't you love it when autocorrect does these silly things for you?
Oh,
it is a strange name.
I get myself into all sorts of trouble with autocorrect.
Yes, it is Jamal's brother. Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, I know that Fleet have had Jamal do a demo quite recently, so they're very familiar with Jamal's work. Yes.
Yes. So by all means, look up Hash. He's brilliant. His work's moving into a lot more. He's using a credit card for a lot of his work at the moment. So it's got lots of little short, stumpy little marks, which is really interesting. Just he doesn't really paint underwater stuff, but this is not the only thing I paint either. But I love his sense of color and movement that he gets, and his girlfriend Marie Antonio is also very good. She usually gets into the David Shepherd wildlife presentations and does a lot with artists and illustrators too. Both of them do. Okay, so one other little thing I wanted to mention is that I do run an online painting club, which has members. So a small group, but we have members in Jamaica, in the States, and in the UK. And it's something that I run on a monthly basis, hosted on Patreon. And we do things like, this is one of our latest projects that we did together. So let me clarify, we don't paint together. I pre-record the exercises and tips to prep you for it. And then you do it in your own time. And then on a Tuesday, we come together and do a seminar, which is live on Zoom, and everyone can ask questions or share their work. And it's all very supportive and lovely. So if you'd like to know more about that, you can always email me or find a link from either of my websites, susanclaire.art or susanclairefineart.com. And the actual Patreon page is patreon.com/Susan Clare. So that's might interest you. So let's move on with the painting. Go back to my other view and put this one over here so you can hear me. And what kind of view you have of me in the small picture, I'd dread to think, but still. So what we're going to do now is to move on, and I'm going to show you a couple of the more unusual techniques that I use to get some effects in here before anything else happens. So I've got some shiny backed paper, and I want to put something in. I know it's going behind. Maybe I should really define this fish better first, but I want some texture in here and in here. What we're looking at here is this kind of yellowy greeny area. I've marked them in this slightly warmer tone so that I know that they were different from the other things. But in actual fact, it doesn't really matter which color we use, because the local color of them, as I said, is more of a lavender sort of color. In fact, you might even, no, we're not going to sneak that in, it'll disrupt the balance and everything else. So we'll just use, I'm going to take up my palette knife. And I do like using palette knife as much as I can, because what I find is that when you use a brush, you have to wash it out, and a lot of plastic, which is basically what acrylic is, goes into the water system. However, you know, sometimes I've gone through trying to coagulate the paint out of the water, so you end up with clean water. Inevitably, a lot of it ends up going into the water system. So with a palette knife, you put on the paint, you wipe it on a towel, and it goes in the bin. It doesn't go into the water system. So that's my preferred method in some ways. So we're going to pick up some blue, and we can mix it onto the palette area we already have, so we can see that it tones and the balance is right with what's already on there. But I want green in it too, so I'm going to pick up some yellow ochre, mix that in rather roughly. That's the right sort of tone we want. Mix up kind of effect. We're going to put it on nice and thick in this area here. Sort of emulate that rounded. Let's put a bit more yellow on the top of it. Really thick. That sunshiny side. I might try and get a little bit more uneven edge to it. That we could. Oh, that's our other type of weed right there. And then I'm going to take a piece of shiny card. You can cut it, you can just tear it down to approximately the right size. You don't waste so much card. And you pop it on top, press down a little, not too hard or you'll spread the paint. And then you're going to lift it up from the top of if it's a plant, you lift it from the top and move it to the bottom, and you end up with these lovely patterns in the surface. Okay, my paint wasn't quite thick enough in the middle there. I might have to redo that. Scrape off what I have on the piece of card. Add it in the middle there. Because it's our bluer section in the middle there, so it's adding a bit more paint. As you can see, it does take quite a lot of paint. We can add the fish in front afterwards. So I'm going to reuse this bit. You can't reuse the card too many times or it stops being, but it's the shininess that helps to create the effect. If you do it with the rough side, you'll get a different look, but just for coral, this happens to be the right look I want. Okay, that's better. I'm hoping you can see that it's got all that texture in there. And so I've now also got that texture on here with quite a lot of paint. So I can actually try printing that onto here in the same way. Lift from the top. You get an interesting version of it there. We've also got a little bit in between here. Let's add some more paint onto the canvas itself, not canvas, board. More down here. And then repeat. Quite like that bit. So we'll just colour this bit. Oops. Damp paper to the rescue. Not with white paint on it. And this little bit here. Okay. Got a bit messy there, but that won't matter, I don't think. So that's one little way to get some interesting texture into your surface. Next thing I want to do is to work on this creature here.
Just a quick question. Sorry, I've missed this one. Apologies. Cheryl asked, do you have any recommendations for the palette knife, the brand that you use?
I've got a beautiful Winsor & Newton one, but it seems to have fallen apart just as quickly as any others. The handle's prettier, but the only thing I would look for, I don't think that as long as it's holding together in one piece, I don't think the brand really matters. What you want to look for is this angle here. When you have a very flat one without that angle, what happens is your knuckles hit the paint, the wet paint, while you're trying to put something down. But with this angle here, you've got room for your fingers so that you can put the palette knife flat and you're not picking up paint yet.
Nice tip, thank you.
Good. Yeah, moving on. So I'm going to move down into slightly smaller brushes or palette knives, and we need to put in some lighter blue areas. Oh, we're doing this one first. Right, so what I want to do is create a lighter version of this, and then we're going to stick some holes in it. So using the palette knife, we'll pick up, this is the area we mixed it up before. We know we can put some, let's put some raw sienna, which is a lighter version of that. We mixed burnt sienna into it before, but we want quite a lot of paint. This is the raw sienna. I'll add a little bit of yellow ochre into that, especially for the top section where it's lighter. So we'll just streak that on like this. And picking up more of the raw sienna. We can leave some of the rich stuff showing through, and further down in the body of the, obviously we've got shadows down the bottom of the rounded form there that we can just leave showing there. Some more. I love when you get these little holes. That's just exactly what I want. But we're also going to make some more. Let's just try and finish it off. I'm not too worried if it's not completely round. In fact, Hash, that we were just talking about, I think he has an article in the current Artists and Illustrators, or maybe it was a reprint, I'm sorry, I don't know, about how to paint an orange with straight lines. Okay, so now that we've got that, we probably want to let it set up just for a minute or two, because it's very wet at the moment, and when we work into it, it might just close up the gaps again. But it depends on the consistency you're looking at as to whether you leave it for any time or not. but I'm going to, you can see the little dimples in the surface. I'm just going to test it out and see what happens. Oh, that's taking off the right back to the blue. We didn't want it to come to blue. We want it to go down to the, burnt sienna layer. Well, that may be a consequence of the fact that the burnt sienna wasn't quite dry enough. But it won't matter. We'll get some dents in it anyway, and that's what's interesting. So what the dents actually are for is that each little individual animal that's living in the commune has it's closed up during the daytime, and so when you see these structures, that's sort of a very pale version of what the corals actually look like at night. When they're at night time, they all put out, each one of these little tiny dents puts out its little legs and goes like this to comb through the water for food. So each one of those things has little legs that look a bit like this. And so it just looks alive and amazing when they're doing, which is one of the reasons night dives are so exciting. You see a lot of activity that you don't see in the daytime, as well as seeing all the colours bright and full. You see all full reds and yellows. There's a lot more red in the reef than you'd expect. And so you don't see it unless you're looking at it with a white light on it. So obviously we're getting blue showing through, but that could be kind of interesting. It's not supposed to come through to the blue, it's just supposed to lift up as far as the burnt sienna. I've done this technique also with brain coral, which works very well, where you can actually get the, lots of little squiggly lines to represent the corrugations in the brain coral. Well, that's probably enough of that. We don't have to do every one, but we're just going to get the gist of it. And it looks approximately like the type of form that would be there doing that. Of course, these little dentations look closer together as you get close to the top of the curve there, so you actually probably can't see them. And of course, mine are probably too far apart compared to the actual thing. But there's several species that look very similar. So even if mine's not quite right for the for this species, it's representing that sort of family of corals. There we go. Oops. There's our boulder coral. Next thing I want to do is using a smaller brush. Let's use this lovely rosemary. It's a 3/4 inch. That's something. Dampened it. Now we're going to make some light blues. I want to get this to look as if it's going away in the distance. Obviously, when you look towards the horizon in real life, above water, you can see, what, 22 miles is it to the horizon, I think? Underwater, you're lucky if you can see 30 feet or 60 feet, maybe if it's a really clear dive. So your entire depth of field is all brought closer. But so things that, a few miles away, you'd give them that misty look, where this is probably 12 feet away and it already looks very misty in the distance. So that's what we're looking for at the moment, is to create some mistiness. So I'm picking up the same cobalt blue that we had, a little bit more greenish, because you're getting sort of the effect of some of the other things around in the water. So we'll add a little of the green gold into it. And then a bit more blue. Should have taken the turquoise actually. And then we'll add a little white. So I'm being cautious with the white. It's a bit too green there. So we want to just get a feel of some horizontal sort of marks that will indicate the fact that there's stuff that's moving away from the view in the distance there. And we can put some little bit more white into that.
Got a question for you from Sue. Who makes the green gold colour you're using?
Winsor & Newton. Yeah, it's not one I see all the time, but and I think it's probably a bit pricey, but it's a lovely colour to use.
Oh, do you ever use gold leaf? Asks Melanie.
I do. In fact, don't know if you've seen any of the other things in my studio here, but I did a whole series of them around 2000. I got quite carried away with images of Egypt, and well, I won't go into it too much. There's a whole thing about the face on Mars and what that means, and I got quite absorbed in all of that, which was really fascinating.
And how do you stick the leaf to the canvas when you're working with it?
It's not, there's various ways of doing it. If you stick to the traditional method, you need gum arabic. It's one of the first things they use that for. Well, I had a lovely book that I read about 25 years ago and taught myself how to do it. But you can use PVA, but there's a way that you have to do it. It's a method of layering and then making it damp before you apply the gold and stuff like that. So rather than tell you in 3 seconds, I'd probably tell you to Google it or do a course on it, because it's a little bit more involved. I was thinking of including it in my online course this year, but I don't think everyone could get the materials that easily. So, okay, I think that's sort of giving us the effect of things going away there a bit more. I'm just going to pick up slightly more white for a couple of marks nearer to us, catching the light in this area. So you can see also that as these fans move away from us, they become just like dark and light rather than seeing any colours in them. That's another sort of reason why. Maybe I should have put some of that texture down there, but just to reinstate that. There's a dark one here. A bit of light on the top of it. I very rarely use white on its own. I like to use it with something else mixed into it, so that it doesn't completely sort of wash out the painting and get chalky. So we do need to create some lighter fish up here, and then after that I think some of this will be dark, more solid enough to work on. So I'm rinsing out my brush because I don't want that green in it this time. As looking up towards the top there, we've got some very light fish, and it's just blue and white in that top section of the painting. So make sure we don't have to get the green in it. So mixing just a puddle of cobalt blue, and then on the edge of that I'm going to pick up white, and we'll create some nice light blues, and then we can get an interaction between these two puddles to get a gradation of one to the other. That's quite nice. And using simple strokes and remembering where the tails are should really work from this way and go backwards, shouldn't I? So we'll have one here. And again, there's shimmers and some parts that are more visible on the fish than others. We need some parts that have more grey into it, maybe. So this is a very kind of square, blocky fish. Got a dark fin at the bottom there. We'll put on that afterwards, I think. These being sort of further away, they are quite. I usually think of them as being larger fish than these. They probably are a little bit more distant, even though they seem to be about the same colour. So we'll also make them less detailed as well, so that they're just sort of barely there. Getting the structure of the fish first, we can put in so there's interesting bits of light and stuff on it later on. This one is sitting right behind this one, so it's probably easier to put this one in first. It's remixing that same level of colour. Very light going into the tail there. We used to do one dive out by the Holiday Inn where the chub just, I think maybe some previous dive shop owners had gotten in the habit of feeding them, and they just wouldn't leave you alone for the entire dive. So you'd always have about 50 of these things moving along with you, which was quite fun to see some slightly bigger fish interacting and not being shy, but it was also a bit disconcerting, because if you never were quite sure if they're going to nibble you, if they've gotten used to having people feed them and you don't have any food. So it's one of the reasons, apart from not being a good practice environmentally, that's another reason why that's not a good practice, to get in the habit of feeding wild animals. So we've got this fish here, which isn't there yet, just a bit of tail. So we'll have that one connecting to this one. It's always good practice in your art to create shapes that link forms together. I'm actually coming back to England in just a few weeks, which is a bit earlier than I normally would. But we're having a problem with our studio building, that it's they've sort of decided they're not renting, the company that rents it to us is not handling it anymore. So we've got a petition mounted for the council to take it on and help, because it's such an important building for the entire community. I don't think you can sign unless you're living in that local area, but it reminded me of one of the locals. The building's called Hoff's, Hadley Old Fire Station, and it reminded me that in the sort of heyday of our dive business, when I had a couple of little dive shops, one was in the Grill, which is on the western end of the island, and quiet, sleepy sort of place. Very, like little thatch huts and stuff to stay in rather than posh hotels, although now it's a lot more built up. But one of, okay, I'm not explaining this very well. Somebody in our group at Hoff's, Hadley, has put up on the petition, to advertise the petition, they put a picture of David Hasselhoff, like everybody loves the Hoff kind of thing. And it reminded me that he actually showed up at our dive shop and went diving with us once, unannounced, but and I didn't know who it was at the time, so I wasn't all that impressed, but everybody else was.
Was he wearing red shorts at the time?
No, nothing like that. I think it was in his night rider phase. So, yeah, he was just very incognito, the girlfriend, and he was very big, though. Remember that? Tall. Okay, so those are coming along. This one's probably a bit too bright. I'll put a bit of water in there to get it to move, and that's a good reason not to, because actually now it's not giving me the effect that I wanted. I need to put a bit more blue into these light mixture here so that we can get a little bit variation into these forms that are there but not there kind of thing. Underneath the part there. And let's move towards the face, get a bit of detailing in the face. Sometimes when you're working with these brushes, you have to make sure that you've got the paint on the right part of the brush. That's part of the challenge, is to, you have to sort of scrape it on the side of the palette or your mixing thing and make sure it's on the end of the brush so you can actually apply it. Oops, that's too dark now. Right. Under here, sometimes it's nicer just to see the colours of the water showing through. This one needs a bit more definition there. After all that, their silveriness is reflecting those watercolours, so that's really what they are. Smoke and mirrors.
So Eleanor has said, this is awesome and very interesting demo. What sharks have you seen when diving, and have you ever painted sharks?
Everyone wants to know about the sharks. We used to see nurse sharks regularly in the summer, and they don't hurt you. All they want to do is lie on the bottom and be ignored. We actually, in the days when we didn't know better, we used to go and pet them. Don't do that now for ecological reasons, not because they would hurt you. They don't have any ability to hurt you. But I've never been somebody who wants to go and swim in a cage with great whites, and that's not my thing, I'm afraid. So no very exciting adventures to tell in the shark department. Something that we do see regularly is eagle rays, and they are absolutely elegant and smooth and just so incredibly ethereal, kind of. They're like large rays, but they're more they have tails that are about 6 feet long, just a little thin tail that trails behind them, and
I've just googled them. They look beautiful.
Sorry,
I've just googled them actually, and they do look incredible.
Yeah, so those I've wanted to paint those quite a lot. I did actually do one for my partner's 70th birthday last year. Actually, it's his favourite animal to see when he's snorkeling in the mornings. So I did a painting of those, like 3 of them in a row, pootling along. And another thing, of course, I'm wearing this turtle t-shirt. I've also done a lot of sort of an ongoing fundraiser with the turtle program, because whilst it's not supporting anything in Jamaica, my lovely goddaughter Anya Mackenzie, she was born here, and I knew her growing up. She ended up going to schooling in England, graduated with a marine biology degree from Liverpool, and now this is like, so that was like, she's now about 28. She, for the last few years, well, since university and even before, she used to volunteer. She's been working with the turtle relief program called Wildlife Sense in Kefalonia, and she's now actually, I think there's only 2 full-time employees, and she's one of them. She's in charge of the day-to-day running of the whole thing now. So wow. I have an ongoing thing. Anybody buys, whether you get a print of this turtle, this is Anya's turtle. You see it on my website. If you buy anything with that print on it, some of the money will go to Wildlife Sense. And of course, if you're helping turtles in one part of the world, it's helping all of them. So
a couple more comments. So while we were talking about sharks, I missed this comment, which for the members of Fleet and possibly Guildford as well, they'll know who this came from. When you were talking about sharks, David Sprott commented, it's the ones with toothache you need to watch out for.
Lovely.
And
Yeah.
and Deborah's also said that she's just returned from the Maldives and saw an easel ray.
I'm sure that's a misprint for eagle, no?
Eagle ray, yes. Very, yeah, back to predictive
lovely.
text and the fun and games of predictive text, yeah.
You know, I don't know why I haven't thought to ask before, because I usually start off by asking, but obviously we have some divers in the audience. That's wonderful.
I guess we do.
No, if you're a diver, or if you've been snorkeling on tropical reefs or Pacific reefs, they have a whole different ecosystem of different creatures in the Pacific, but they will have the same, same niche. They'll do the same job on the reef, just that there'll be a slightly different species doing that job.
Here we go. What's this? Oh, you've inspired me to go to Jamaica and do some snorkeling, shallow diving. Where do you suggest? And that's from Amanda.
Okay, so there is a protected marine park in Montego Bay, which covers all the area from the airport going down to the west, down by well, the place that I'm going to be running a retreat at, an artist retreat, is called the Wharf House, and it's right on the waterfront near to the end of that marine park. And you have access from your room, walk out the door, walk onto the jetty and get in the water. And it's some of the better reef that's close into the shore right there. There are hotels like Secrets and stuff on the Freeport that you can get out into the reefs very easily. Most of those hotels will run, boat trips out to the reef anyway, and then you've got a sort of a lifeguard situation right in place as well. Negril, which is on the western tip of the island, that has naturally it has more protection from the storms than on the north coast. Don't bother with the south coast. It's all stirred up and a lot more silt in the water down on the south coast. If you're looking for snorkeling, that's not the place to go. Anywhere in Negril, like on the west end, it's all rocky. There's no beach there. There's a 7-mile beach on the other side. So within a couple of miles, taxi ride, or you can get from one side to the other. But the good snorkeling is on the rocky side. So I'm just looking for bits of fish here to overlap and bring out a bit more. This one needs some darks on it. Yeah, we will get to needing darks in a minute. So I'm just going to do a few more lights and then switch back to darks again. So I've got this little, I don't know why I put it in the middle of the dark, but I need to do this. This one's tail. Oh, it's this one that's missing. It's got a light tail on it, and it nearly interacts with these guys. So we want to put a light tail that's contrasting with the dark behind. That works. And then it sort of gets lost. So I don't want to put this very creamy version right the way up, because it needs.
We've got about 10 minutes officially left, just to give you a little timer.
Sorry?
We've got about 10 minutes until 4:30.
Oh, yikes.
I know. I think this always happens. We get chatting and asking lots of questions, and our demo artists always get really into what they're doing. And before we know it, we're savagely running out of time. Leslie's asked, do you ever paint the beautiful view from your studio?
Yes, I've done that several times. I don't think I have it up as a print yet. I really should do that. Yeah, I love painting palm trees. You'll see palm trees on my website, and there's just something really intriguing about the way they form and stuff, and how you can do it with blocky brush strokes that don't connect, and yeah, that works very well. One of the things I did want to show you, which maybe I'll just leave the fish for now, because they're there but not there. We do need some more darks in the middle here. I'm aware of that, and we need to finish like this fish probably needs a bit of help. But one of the things I wanted to show you was how I do the fire coral with a palette knife. So we're going back to the palette knife and we want some yellow. I'm just going to pick up bright yellow straight from the palette and just streak it down like this. And it gives this effect, sort of following the look of the way that those corals grow. Because I'm layering it now onto yellow ochre and stuff, it'll stay looking yellow instead of turning green. So that's useful. So this is cadmium yellow that I'm just using quite with abandon here. And I'm not that fussy, it doesn't turn out exactly like the reference picture, as long as it looks like the right structure. I can put some little white lid tops on the edges. And by the way, that's how fire coral grows. That's not the bleaching effect that I told you about. On other corals, if you see white tips, it probably is bleaching. The fire coral does grow that way anyway. And you can see immediately this is bringing the foreground towards us as well. Oops, don't want to see too much of that marks in there. So the colour I put on before obviously is creating the shadow marks between the areas that are now lighter yellow. So I might leave that part quite darkish and let's move up here. Oh, we haven't done the animal yet either, the lovely feather star. This. If you have any interest in coming to Jamaica in September and doing a creative retreat and a lot of snorkeling, connecting with nature in the mornings and then doing some experimental techniques. I'm doing it with another artist called Alex McIntyre, who is also she teaches at the university level at the University of Hertfordshire. And we are looking to take expressions of interest very soon, because if we don't get, we need to make a decision as to whether it's going forward or it isn't. So the time to get in touch.
Where would we find the details on that?
Sorry?
Where would we find the details on that?
There's a link to it in the workshops page on my website, susanclaire.art, but I will send you a link for the brochure along with the recording, if that's all right.
Okay. And for those that may need to leave on time, just to let you know, the full recording will be shared to all the societies afterwards. And also, what we normally do is ask our artists to send us a picture of the final picture, because often everybody likes to have a little bit of fiddle before they share the final artwork, so you can see what it looks like at the end as well. And any links and information will also be on that email, so don't worry, you're not going to miss out on anything if you do need to finish at past.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, you know us so well.
It's normal, it's very common, and you can't rush these things.
Yeah, and to be fair, I usually get further along than this in a demo, but I don't know, something was a bit sticky with the paint today, and anyway, it's all good. It'll work out. I think you can see immediately that the yellow is doing something to the entire painting. That's suddenly it has depth.
It's incredible how something can suddenly lift a picture so quickly.
And it's usually the last few minutes that happens.
I know.
So if you miss the end, it's where else do we need this? Up here? Maybe not quite. So I'm taking it thinner there because there's more green in that section. Just do a bit more variety in that bit. So I don't want too much attention going off the side there, but it's going to break it up a little bit. Now here is where we've got our lovely, if we've got, can we spare 5 minutes more?
I can. I'm happy.
Okay. As I really want to put in the feather star for you, just to get an idea of what that's going to look like. So rinsing off and just wiping off my palette knife. So we said it's going to be red and white, right? But I don't want it to be too jarring. So I'm going to think red and white, but I'm also going to mix some burnt sienna with the red and some probably yellow ochre with the white. And we're going to take the side of the palette knife, or you can use a credit card. And just in the same way, I'm going to take, this red's very sticky too. So a bit of red. Let's actually use that raw sienna that's already there. It's using up. Mix that in. And then we want the knife edge of the palette to be where we're creating the thing. So this may be very sticky and it's probably a bit early to do this, but just to give you an idea of what's going to happen is we're just going to draw with it on the knife edge. And this creature, as I said before, is kind of there but not there. It's constantly moving its arms. So sort of a shimmery look is good. If it's incomplete, that's fine. So we've got the kind of structure of it. The shorter legs are down this way because they're coming towards us. So you've got some foreshortening going on. It also moves partly with the current. So if the current's moving this way, as the fish are, it tends to reinforce that sense of movement throughout the piece. So we'll just put some thicker bits down where they're all joining together in the center. That's okay, that'll work. And some going this way. Don't really want it in front of this yellow. That's very much closer to us. So we'll avoid that. And down a bit further, I think. If they do get too large, it's okay, we can put the white bits on top. Some more up here. Okay, that might be enough red. So cleaning off the palette knife. And so white, we're going to mix a little white into, picking up quite a lot of white. But I don't want it to be pure white because that will just take everything, put everything else in the background. So we're going to mix some of this red mixture into it. And this is probably the most thorough that I'm mixing anything in this entire piece. Don't want it to look too pretty pink, but let's see if we can get some of this movement into the brushwork. I mean, not brushwork, palette knife work, so that it gives you the effect of featheriness. Of course, this is another creature that depends on clean water, bringing the food to it. It can move, if it has to, it can take off and move its legs and go to another spot, but it still needs to be able to filter plankton from the water. A bit more confusion down here, there's too many straight lines there. And again, make sure that the paint is where you can get it from. So adjust and Ah, that's better. Quite a lot of white on the tips here, so we'll go back in and put some more white with it when we've finished this section. Okay, we don't want to overdo it. I don't want to make him look like it's the main thing in the picture, although if we're not careful, it will do. So slightly more white, still with some of the pink in it. And I'm just putting it more on the end. I don't want it to be heavy though. Put it on the end. Like that, and we'll do a few of the tips a bit more solid. I love this feathery look here. I don't really want to interfere with that. Some of the ends are in front of the other. There are ends all through here, if you see what I mean. So take a sort of a line, bring some more in there. The other thing that I will do is put a few eyes in the fish before it's finished. Not all of those up there because they're less important, but some of these ones that aren't quite there yet in here need an eye so that you realize, oh, that is a fish. What have we got here? There's some quite good movement looking stuff going in there. And right, I think that's it for the feather star right now. Of course, going over the top of that texture becomes quite tricky. But should be able to put it in there. I think that's probably enough for that animal. We don't want it to be becoming too intense, too rubbing. Oh, thank you, looking amazing. I've just seen some, haven't been seeing any of the comments. Thanks so much. Sally, how are we doing? Do you want me to wind it up there, or should I do a little bit more?
I think we should probably wind it up, but I think what would be nice if you could share the sort of, you know, the end piece in a photo for us afterwards, because I think, you know, you showed how to get all the depth in there and all the technique, and I think, you know, this sort of additional details is something that you know, would just be nice to see how it looks at the end. So
yes, absolutely, yeah. I'm very willing to do that. I'll come back and
I'm always just fascinated with this whole process. It's so lovely to see how people do this, because you're just like, oh, and then suddenly it all comes together, and yes. Now it looks completely different again. It's amazing.
Well, it's quite, you know, I think I've been doing these demos now for about 5 or 6 years, but it always used to be really nerve-wracking. You get to a point sort of 2/3 of the way through where you're thinking it's not come out of the ugly duckling phase yet, so I don't think it's going to, but it usually does. I
think the comments are very generally, well, everybody's loving it. They're saying all very, very positive feedback. So yeah, so what I will do is I will obviously connect with you afterwards. Just email me over a picture of the final one and obviously the recording, and I will then share that with the different societies probably in a couple of days, to be honest. And any other sort of links and references we've talked about will also be shared on that email as well.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Sally. And
well, thank you. It's been amazing.
Thank you so much for letting me share the time with all of you. It's been such a lovely big group.
I think we all now want to come to Jamaica as well. Okay.
I hope some of you do. Look me up if you do.
Oh, I will.
Shall I put it onto the other view so that people can wave? And I don't know if that comes out on the should come out on the
Yes.
Gone. Grid view. Oh, it's because this is spotlighted. Hang on. No. Oh, everyone's got their cameras off, right? I think that's why it's not. Oh, right thing. That would help. Gallery. There we go. Oh, hello.
Hi.
Lovely to see you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, we will leave you to your afternoon, morning.
I will
No, you're
be. Yes, it is lunchtime, afternoon soon.
lovely. Well, thank you so much again. It's been a brilliant demonstration.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.